Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The barista's hand trembled as she passed me my coffee. And that's when I saw it. The shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. Except it was November in Seattle, and her skin rippled with something that made my stomach drop. Behind her smile, I saw her face. Different. Older, hospital pale. Tubes down her throat. The beeping of machines that would fail her at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, 43 years from now. I blinked hard. The vision dissolved. She was just Madison again, 22, nose ring, catching the cafe lights, completely unaware that I'd just witnessed her final moments. "Sir? You okay?" Her voice pulled me back. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But I wasn't okay. I hadn't been okay for 3 months now, ever since the accident changed everything. And if you're listening to this in the dark right now, cozy in your bed, thinking this is just another story, I need you to understand something. This gift, this curse, it's real. And once you know what I know, once you see what I see, you can never unsee it. Before I tell you what happened next, before I explain why I'm recording this at 2 a.m. with my hands still shaking, I need you to do something for me. Look at your hands right now. Really look at them. See how solid they appear, how permanent? That's what I used to think too, but permanence. That's just an illusion we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. Now, let me tell you how this nightmare began, and why I can never sleep peacefully again. The story begins now. 3 months ago, I was just Nathan Cross, a data analyst for a tech startup in downtown Seattle. 34 years old, divorced, the kind of guy who meal prepped on Sundays and had a favorite booth at the local diner. Completely, boringly normal. The accident happened on I-5 during rush hour. One moment I was listening to a true crime podcast. The next, an 18-wheeler jackknifed across 3 lanes. I remember the sound of metal screaming against metal, the way my Honda Civic crumpled like paper, the windshield exploding into diamonds of glass that hung in the air, beautiful and terrible. Then, darkness. I woke up 3 days later in Harborview Medical Center. The doctors called it a miracle. No major injuries, just a concussion and some bruising. They kept me for observation, ran test after test. Everything came back normal, except nothing was normal anymore. It started with my nurse, Patricia. She came in to check my vitals, and when our eyes met, the air around her face wavered. For just a second, I saw her differently. Gaunt, crying, clutching a bottle of pills in a bathroom with peeling yellow wallpaper. The vision lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like drowning. "Honey, you all right?" Patricia asked, her warm hand on my forehead. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. How do you tell someone you just watched them die? The visions came randomly at first, a glimpse here, a flash there. The janitor mopping my floor. I saw him collapse in a garden, surrounded by grandchildren, peaceful. The young resident who checked on me. A car accident at 28, texting while driving. Each vision hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping. I thought I was losing my mind, brain damage from the accident. Had to be. But then my sister visited. Rachel sat beside my bed holding my hand, telling me about her kids, and suddenly her face shifted. Older, much older, gray-haired and laughing at something, sitting in a rocking chair. Then older still, until she simply faded away like a photograph left too long in the sun. Natural causes. Age 91. "Nathan?" She squeezed my hand. "You're crying." I was, because in that moment I realized 2 things. First, these weren't hallucinations. They were real. And second, My little sister was going to outlive me by decades. I knew because I'd already seen my own death. They released me a week later. I went back to my apartment in Capitol Hill, back to my data spreadsheets and coffee routine. Tried to pretend everything was fine, but how do you focus on quarterly reports when you can see how your boss will choke on a piece of steak at his retirement party? How do you make small talk with your neighbor when you know she'll fall down her stairs in 6 years? The worst part? The visions were getting stronger, more detailed. At first, I only saw deaths when I made direct eye contact. Then it progressed. A brush of hands was enough. By week 2, I could see it just by looking at someone for more than a few seconds. The shimmer would start at the edges of their face, like reality was peeling away, showing me their final moments. I started wearing sunglasses everywhere, kept my head down, ordered groceries online, worked from home, anything to avoid seeing, knowing. But isolation made it worse. The visions started coming in dreams. I'd see strangers dying in ways I couldn't prevent. A kid in Florida drowning in a pool. An elderly man in Maine having a heart attack while shoveling snow. Each death felt real, immediate, unstoppable. I tried therapy. Dr. Sarah Winters came highly recommended. Her office smelled like lavender and had those generic motivational posters. "Tell me about these visions," she said, pen poised over her notepad. I almost laughed. How could I tell her that I'd already seen her death? Pancreatic cancer, 57 years old. She'd face it with grace, but the pain, I think the accident affected me more than I realized, I said instead. She prescribed anxiety medication. I took it. It didn't help. How could it? The problem wasn't in my head, it was in my eyes, or my soul, or wherever this cursed gift resided. 3 weeks after leaving the hospital, I made a decision. If I had to live with this ability, I'd find a way to use it. Maybe I could warn people, save them. That's when I met Emma. Emma Chen worked at the corner bodega where I'd started buying energy drinks to stay awake. Sleep brought too many visions. She was 25, always reading thick fantasy novels between customers, her black hair in a messy bun. The first time I saw her death, I actually gasped out loud. It was soon. Too soon. 3 weeks from that Tuesday afternoon. She'd be walking home from work, earbuds in, music too loud. Wouldn't hear the delivery truck backing up. Wouldn't see it until... "You okay, man?" Emma asked, concern creasing her forehead. "You look really pale." I had to save her, had to try, but how do you warn someone about their death without sounding insane? I started small. Casual conversations. "Hey, you should be careful walking home. Lots of crazy drivers lately." She'd laugh. "Thanks, Dad. I'll look both ways. Promise." I tried being more direct, left anonymous notes. "Be careful on 15th Street, watch for trucks." She threw them away, probably thinking she had a stalker. As the days counted down, I grew desperate. Started showing up at the bodega near her shift end, offering to walk her home. She got uncomfortable, threatened to call the police. 1 week before her death date, I broke, told her everything. We were alone in the store, rain hammering the windows. "Emma, you're going to think I'm crazy, but I can see how people die. And you're going to get hit by a truck next Tuesday. 15th and Pine. 9:43 p.m. She stared at me for a long moment, then reached for her phone. "Please," I begged. Just take a different route home that night. Or leave earlier, or later. Just not 9:43 on 15th. "Get out," she said quietly, "and don't come back." I left. What else could I do? That Tuesday I waited on 15th and Pine. 9:30 came, 9:35, 9:40. At 9:41 I saw her, walking fast, shoulders hunched against the cold. Earbuds in, just like in my vision. At 9:42 I heard the delivery truck's reverse alarm beeping. At 9:43 I ran, grabbed her arm, yanked her back just as the truck blindly backed onto the sidewalk, right where she'd been walking. Emma screamed. The truck driver slammed his brakes. I fell backwards, pulling her with me. We sat on the wet pavement, breathing hard. The truck driver jumped out, apologizing, saying he couldn't see in his mirrors the rain, the dark. Emma looked at me, eyes wide. You knew?" I helped her up, my hands shaking. "I tried to tell you." "How?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I don't know. Since my accident, I just see things." She stepped back. Not in fear, but in something else. Awe, maybe, or horror. "What? What did you see, exactly?" So I told her every detail, the yellow of her raincoat, the song that would be playing in her earbuds, Aurora's running with the wolves, the way the truck's tire would have... "Stop." She held up a hand, then quieter. "What else can you see? Can you see everyone?" I nodded. "Even yourself?" I looked away. That was the one thing I hadn't told anyone. The vision that haunted me most. 3 years, I said quietly. 3 years from now, heart attack, alone in my apartment. My neighbor finds me 4 days later. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, "But you saved me. You changed my future. So maybe you can change yours too." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But even as she said it, I could see the shimmer starting around her face again. The future reshuffling itself. Finding a new path to the same destination. "I need to go," I said. "Wait," she grabbed my arm. "You saved my life. Let me buy you coffee or something, please." I should have said no, should have walked away, but I was so tired of being alone with this curse. "Okay," I said, "coffee." That's how it started. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became long walks where I'd tell her about the visions and she'd listen without judgment. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a monster. But I should have known better. Should have realized that death doesn't like being cheated. Because 3 weeks later, Emma's shimmer came back. Different death, different time, but just as certain. And this time, it was my fault. Emma started getting headaches. Little ones at first. She'd pop an Advil and joke about too much coffee, but I could see the shimmer growing stronger around her. The new death vision creeping in at the edges. Brain aneurysm, 2 months from now, in her sleep. "We should get you checked out," I said one evening. We were at her apartment, takeout boxes scattered on her coffee table. "Just to be safe." "Nathan," she put down her chopsticks, "you can't save everyone." "I can try." "From what? Death finds a way, right? You said so yourself." She touched my hand. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe your gift isn't about preventing death. It's about preparing for it." But I couldn't accept that, not for her. I researched everything. Brain aneurysms, warning signs, prevention. Dragged her to 3 different doctors. They all said the same thing. She was fine. Perfect health, nothing to worry about. "They can miss things," I insisted. "We need an MRI, a specialist." Emma grew frustrated. "Nathan, you're making me paranoid. I can't live like this. Waiting to die." "Everyone's waiting to die," I snapped. "I just know when." She flinched, and I realized then what I was doing to her. My gift had become her curse. "I'm sorry," I said. I can't lose you." "You already have," she said quietly. "You're so focused on my death, you're missing my life." She was right. Every moment we spent together, I was watching for symptoms, analyzing, calculating. The shimmer around her face grew stronger each day, and I was drowning in dread. That night, I made a decision. I'd stop looking at her, stop triggering the visions. Maybe if I didn't see her death, it wouldn't happen. Magical thinking, but I was desperate. For 2 weeks, I avoided her eyes. Wore my sunglasses indoors. It was awkward, strange, but she tolerated it. Said she understood. Then came the morning I forgot. I woke up in her apartment. She'd had a bad headache the night before, and I'd stayed to make sure she was okay. Morning light streamed through her windows. She was making coffee, humming softly, and when she turned to hand me a mug, our eyes met. The vision hit me like a sledgehammer, but this time it was different. Not just her death, but what led to it. I saw myself, frantic, driving her to the hospital, speeding through a red light, the semi-truck hitting us broadside. Her death instant. Mine. The same heart attack I'd seen before, but sooner. Triggered by the trauma of losing her. "Nathan?" Emma's voice seemed far away. "What did you see?" I told her, every detail. She set down her coffee mug with shaking hands. "So, if you try to save me, we both die. Sooner." We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "Maybe that's what your gift is really showing you. Not just how people die, but how they're connected. How one death ripples into others." "Then what's the point?" I felt hollow. "If I can't save anyone, if trying makes it worse, why show me at all?" Emma moved closer, took my hands. "What if it's not about saving? What if it's about preparing, accepting, making peace? I don't want to make peace with your death. But you have to. We all do, eventually." She squeezed my hands. "Nathan, look at me. Really look at me. Not at my death, at my life." I raised my eyes to hers. For the first time in months, I didn't try to look away when the shimmer started. Instead, I looked deeper, past the vision of her death, past the fear, and I saw something else. I saw her laughing at bad movies, reading her fantasy novels, dancing badly to 80s music in her kitchen, living, fully and completely, right up until the end. "See?" she whispered. "That's the real gift. Not seeing death, but seeing life in spite of it." That night, we talked until dawn. About death, yes, but also about dreams. About the trips she wanted to take. The book she wanted to write. The life she wanted to live in whatever time she had. "Promise me something," she said as the sun rose. "When I'm gone, don't stop living. Don't let this gift become just about death. Emma." "Promise me." I promised. But we both knew it was a lie because 2 nights later she didn't wake up. The aneurysm came early, quietly, peacefully, just like I'd seen. I called 911, but I already knew the shimmer was gone. Just gone. At her funeral, I saw death everywhere. Every mourner carried their ending with them. Her mother, car accident in 5 years. Her brother, old age. Her best friend, a disease I couldn't pronounce decades from now. But for the first time, I also saw what Emma had tried to show me. The life between now and then. The love, the laughter, the small moments that make up a life regardless of how it ends. After everyone left, I stood by her grave. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I spent so much time trying to save you, I forgot to just be with you." The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere a bird sang. I walked home as the sun set, seeing death everywhere, but also life. The jogger who'd have a heart attack in 30 years was running with pure joy now. The old man walking his dog would die next winter, but today he was smiling at the sunset. That night, I looked in the mirror. Really looked. Saw my own death shimmer. 3 years, alone. Heart attack. But also saw 3 years of life. 3 years of choices. 3 years to live like Emma taught me. I started small, went back to the coffee shop, made eye contact with Madison, the barista. Saw her death again, but also her smile, her kindness, her life. "The usual?" she asked. "Actually," I said, "surprise me." She grinned. "Living dangerously, huh?" Something like that. The shimmer would always be there, the knowledge, the burden. But Emma was right. The gift wasn't about preventing death. It was about cherishing life in spite of it. But here's the thing about gifts. Sometimes they come with a price you don't see coming. Because last week something changed. The visions stopped showing me strangers' deaths. Now, They only show me one thing, one scene over and over. My apartment, 3 years from now, but the details keep changing. Sometimes I'm alone, sometimes someone's with me, someone I haven't met yet. And sometimes in those visions I'm not the one having the heart attack. Sometimes I'm the one causing it. I've been recording this at 2 a.m. because I can't sleep anymore. Not because of what I see, but because of what I might do. The gift is evolving, changing, showing me not just how people die, but how I might kill them. If you're still listening, if you've made it this far, I need you to remember something. We all carry death with us, every moment, every breath. The only difference is I can see it coming. But maybe that's not a curse, maybe it's a warning. Because tomorrow, I'm going to try something. I'm going to walk into that coffee shop, and I'm going to look at everyone. Really look. Not to see their deaths, but to see if I'm in them. To see if I'm the reason they die, and if I am, well, let's just say my 3 years might become 3 days. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, I'm just a voice in your darkness, telling you a truth you probably don't want to hear. We're all dying, every second, every breath. The only question is, what are you doing with the breaths you have left? Sweet dreams, if you can still have them. And hey, if you want to know what happens next, if you need to know whether I become death itself or find a way to break this curse, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's recording, if there is one, is going to change everything. The shimmer is starting again, but this time it's not on someone else's face, it's on my hands, and they're covered in blood. Now, listen. The whispers, and make a decision whether we are going to cooperate with the whispers or we just want to skip them. But actually, no one can skip these whispers. If you walk away from them, they will run towards you until they reach you. They confront you, make you pay, make you suffer the same thing they suffer. There is no escape from them. If you want to escape, help them, so they can have peace, and you also can have it. Help, or you will ask for help soon. So, the end of today's video has arrived. Share your personal horror experiences in the comments. Also, comment the part of the story that you find the most horror and terrifying. If you like this video, leave a like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Also, ring the bell icon so you don't miss the upcoming videos. Remember, don't run from whispers, because they follow you. They know you. They want you to listen, just confront them. Now, sleep well, or should I say, have a haunted night. Story number 2. The day my golden retriever started whimpering at 3:47 a.m., I knew something was wrong. Not just wrong. Something that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the quiet Vermont town I'd just moved to. You see, dogs know things we don't. They sense things we can't. And when a dog that's protected you through 3 home invasions suddenly refuses to protect you from something, you better listen. But I didn't. God help me. I didn't. If you're listening to this late at night, alone in your bed, I need you to do something for me. Check if your dog is acting strange, because what I'm about to tell you might save your life. Hit that subscribe button now, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why some trees should never be touched, and why sometimes our pets are the only thing standing between us and something ancient. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 months ago, I inherited my grandmother's farmhouse in Willowbrook, Vermont, population 2,847. The kind of place where everyone knows your coffee order and the biggest news is when Mrs. Henderson's cat has kittens. The inheritance came as a shock. Grandma and I hadn't been close. She'd lived in Seattle most of my life, visiting only for major holidays. Always seemed nervous. Checking over her shoulder, Mom said it was just her way. But looking back now, I think she was checking to see if something had followed her. I'd brought my golden retriever, Max, with me from Boston. He was 7 years old, trained as a therapy dog, and had this uncanny ability to sense when I was about to have a panic attack in the city. He'd saved me more times than I could count. Once, during a particularly bad episode in a parking garage, he literally dragged me to my car, refusing to let me spiral into that dark place my mind sometimes went. The farmhouse sat on 12 acres, mostly woodland, with a massive oak tree dominating the front yard. The realtor, a nervous woman named Dottie, had mentioned it was over 300 years old. Historic, she'd said, twirling her pen. The Bennett oak. They call it after the original owners. Bennett? I'd asked. But this was my grandmother's house, and she was a Chen. Dottie had laughed, a strange, hollow sound. Oh, well, houses change hands. Dear, though. She'd paused, shuffling papers. Now that you mention it, the records do show it's been in your family for, goodness, generations. Your grandmother must have been a Bennett before she married. That first week was perfect. Max loved the space, the freedom. He'd bound through the tall grass, chasing butterflies and barking at squirrels. Every morning, we'd have coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the mountains purple and gold. He'd discovered a family of rabbits living under the tool shed and spent hours trying to make friends with them, never trying to hurt them, just wanting to play. The house itself was beautiful. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places. A stone fireplace big enough to stand in. The kitchen still had the original cast-iron stove, though I mostly used the modern electric range Grandma had installed. Everything smelled of lavender and old wood. Home? It smelled like home. But on the 8th night, everything changed. I woke to Max's whimpering. Not his usual nightmare sounds, but something different, higher-pitched, desperate. He was pressed against my bedroom door, tail between his legs, shaking like he had during thunderstorms. But the night was clear. "What is it?" "Boy?" I whispered, checking my phone. 3:47 a.m. He wouldn't budge from the door, wouldn't even look at me. Just stared at the window facing the front yard, facing the oak tree. His whole body was rigid, muscles tensed like he was ready to fight or flee. I pulled back the curtain. Nothing. Just the massive silhouette against the star-filled sky. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver light. The oak's branches swayed gently, Spanish moss dancing like ghostly hair. Beautiful. Really. But Max's whimpering intensified. "It's okay," I soothed. But my voice cracked, because deep down, in that primal part of your brain that still remembers when we were prey, I felt it too. Something was wrong. The air felt heavy, electric, like before a storm. But the weather app showed clear skies for days. I tried to go back to sleep, but Max wouldn't settle. He paced the room, pausing at the window every few minutes to stare at the tree. Finally, around 5 a.m., he exhausted himself and curled up on my feet, but even in sleep, he whimpered. The next morning, Max refused to go outside. I opened the front door, called him. Nothing. He planted himself in the kitchen, as far from the entrance as possible. I had to physically carry all 70 pounds of him to the car just to drive him to the back field to do his business. The moment we returned, he'd bolt inside, tail tucked. Maybe he saw a bear. My neighbor, Tom Garrett, suggested when I mentioned it. He was fixing my fence. Had been all week, nice guy, mid-50s, with hands like leather and a Red Sox cap permanently attached to his head. Black bears come down from the mountains sometimes. Dogs can smell 'em from miles away. But I knew Max. He'd faced down a black bear once during a camping trip in New Hampshire. Hadn't even flinched. Just stood between me and it, hackles raised, until it wandered off. This was different. This was pure terror. "Has he always been like this?" Tom asked, hammering a nail. "With the tree, I mean." "No, just started this week. Why?" Tom's hammer paused mid-swing. "No reason, just, well, local stories. You know, every old town's got 'em." "What kind of stories?" He resumed hammering. Harder than necessary. "Nothing worth repeating." "Hey, you want me to trim back some of these branches while I'm here, the ones hanging over your roof?" I said yes, but noticed he meant the maple branches, not the oak. When I asked about trimming the oak too, he suddenly remembered another appointment. That afternoon, I decided to investigate the oak tree myself. It truly was magnificent up close. The trunk was easily 15 feet around. Bark deep and grooved like ancient scars. Spanish moss draped from its branches like funeral shrouds. Some of the roots broke through the ground, thick as my thigh, creating little hollows where leaves collected. As I circled it, taking photos for my Instagram, I noticed something odd. The grass around the base was dead in a perfect circle. Not brown, dead, black and brittle, as if burned. But there were no signs of fire. The line was so precise it looked drawn with a compass, about 6 feet from the trunk in every direction. I knelt down, touched the dead grass. It crumbled to ash between my fingers. Beneath it, the soil was gray, dry, sterile. I'd never seen anything like it. I reached out to touch the bark. Max's barking exploded from the house. Frantic, desperate, I'd never heard him sound like that. It wasn't his warning bark or his play bark. It was primal, almost a scream. I jerked my hand back and ran inside. He was at the window, pawing at the glass so hard I thought he'd break it, leaving muddy smears, trying to get to me. The moment I entered, he nearly knocked me over, licking my hands, my face, checking me over like he did after my panic attacks. "I'm okay, buddy, I'm okay." But his eyes said I wasn't. His eyes said I'd almost done something terrible. That night, I made dinner and tried to act normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about Max's reaction, about the dead grass, about Tom's sudden departure. I'd lived with Max for 7 years. He'd never acted like this. Around 9 p.m., I was washing dishes when I heard it, a sound from outside, like wind chimes, but we didn't have any. I looked out the kitchen window. The oak tree's smaller branches were moving, but nothing else was. No wind in the grass, no movement in the other trees, just the oak, swaying to music only it could hear. Max pressed against my legs, a low growl building in his chest. Then I saw something that made my blood freeze. There was someone standing under the tree. I blinked. The figure was gone, but I knew what I'd seen. A tall shadow, perfectly still, facing the house. Max hadn't moved from my side. His growl had turned to a whine, high and fearful. I double-checked all the locks, closed all the curtains. We slept in the living room that night, or tried to, every time I dozed off. Max would nudge me awake, his eyes fixed on the front door. The next morning, I walked the perimeter of the house, no footprints, no disturbed grass, except the dead circle around the oak had grown. What had been 6 feet was now 7. The expansion was subtle but unmistakable. I needed answers. The Willowbrook Public Library was housed in a converted Victorian mansion. The librarian, Mrs. Eleanor Price, had that look of someone who'd been there since the building was new. Gray hair in a perfect bun, glasses on a chain, The works. The Bennett oak? She repeated my question, fingers pausing over her keyboard. Why do you want to know about that? I inherited the property, my grandmother. Eleanor Chen, she said softly. I wondered when you'd come asking. Your grandmother and I went to school together, before she left town, before she became a Chen. So she was a Bennett? Mrs. Price stood, motioned for me to follow. We went up a narrow staircase to the historical archives. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. She pulled out a thick folder labeled Bennett Family, newspaper clippings. I've been adding to this for 40 years. She said, call it a morbid fascination. Or maybe a warning. Take your time, I'll be downstairs. I opened the folder. The first clipping was from 1752. Jeremiah Bennett, founder of our Fairtown, found deceased. The esteemed Mr. Bennett was discovered beneath the great oak he so cherished. No signs of violence were apparent. Dr. Josiah Mills attributes the death to failure of the heart. The next was from 1834. Search continues for young Mary Bennett, the daughter of Mr. Cornelius Bennett, age 8 years, has been missing for 3 days. She was last seen playing beneath the family oak. Her bonnet was discovered in the tree's upper branches, though none can explain how it came to be there. 1891 brought horror. Triple tragedy strikes Bennett family. Following yesterday's severe thunderstorm, the 3 youngest Bennett children were found deceased at the base of the ancient oak. Though lightning struck several trees in the vicinity, the oak remained unscathed. The children appear to have sought shelter beneath its boughs. The cause of their demise remains mysterious, as no burns or injuries were found. Page after page, death after death, always connected to the tree. 1923, Jonathan Bennett, last male heir, found hanging from the oak's lowest branch. 1945, Sarah Bennett dies in her sleep. Her bedroom window faced the oak. 1967, Bennett farmhouse burns to the ground. Only the oak survives, untouched. 1979, Margaret Bennett, age 16, found catatonic beneath the tree, never speaks again. 1998, local teenager Rebecca Hayes trespasses on abandoned Bennett property, found unconscious beneath oak, dies 3 days later, never waking. But it was the final clipping that made my hands shake. Local woman returns home to die. Eleanor Chen, formerly Bennett, passed away Thursday after a brief illness, per her wishes. She will be buried in Willowbrook Cemetery. She is survived by 1 granddaughter, Sarah Chen of Boston. Mrs. Chen left Willowbrook in 1960 and rarely returned, though she maintained ownership of the historic Bennett property. The date was 3 months ago, right before I got the call about my inheritance. There was a handwritten note paper-clipped to the article, Mrs. Price's careful script. Eleanor called me the day before she died, said the tree was calling her home, said she'd run far enough, long enough. I asked what she meant. She just said, "It's hungry, and I'm so very tired." I think she knew what was coming. I think she chose it. I photocopied everything and left. Mrs. Price caught my arm at the door. "Your dog," she said, "does he go near the tree?" "No, he's terrified of it." She nodded slowly. "Good, listen to him. Animals know things. My cat won't even walk on that side of the town." Back home, I spread the copies on the kitchen table. Max lay at my feet. Occasionally whining, I started mapping the deaths, looking for patterns. Every generation. At least 1 Bennett died by the tree, but more interesting were the gaps, long stretches where nothing happened. 1752 to 1834, 1923 to 1945, 1967 to 1998. What was different during those times? I pulled up ancestry websites, cross-referencing dates. The pattern emerged slowly. During each quiet period, Bennett lived in the house. The deaths clustered when the property was empty, when no Bennett was in residence. My phone rang. Unknown number. Miss Chen, a creaky voice. "This is Agnes Bennett. I think we need to talk." Bennett, but I thought, there are still a few of us scattered about, those who were smart enough to leave before. She paused. "Before our time came, can you meet me tomorrow? The diner on Main Street, noon?" I agreed. After hanging up, I realized Max had crawled under the table, something he only did during fireworks. "It's okay, boy. Tomorrow we'll get answers." But that night, the scratching started. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails on bark. I crept to the window, peeked through the curtain. The oak stood silent in the moonlight, but the sound continued, coming from inside the walls, no, from beneath the house. Max pressed against me, shaking. We retreated to my bedroom, locked the door. The scratching followed, circling, testing. By dawn, it had stopped, but neither of us had slept. When I finally ventured outside, I found them. Scratches in the oak's bark. Fresh, deep. They looked like symbols, or letters in the language I didn't recognize. But staring at them made my vision blur, my head pound, and the dead circle had grown again. 8 feet now, reaching toward the house like a slow, inevitable tide. Agnes Bennett was ancient, skin like parchment, eyes milky with cataracts. But when she spoke about the tree, those eyes cleared, sharpened with memory and fear. "I'm 93 years old," she began, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Last of my generation. We all left. You see, all us cousins and second cousins scattered to the winds in the 60s. Why? Because we knew what was coming. Every Bennett knows. It's in the blood, in the dreams." She leaned forward. "Tell me, have you dreamed of it yet?" I thought of the nightmares that had started 2 days ago, the tree's roots growing through my bedroom floor, wrapping around my ankles, pulling me down into earth that tasted of copper and rot. Yes, then it's beginning, the calling. Your grandmother fought it for 60 years. Impressive, really. Most only last 20 or 30 before they come home. "What is it? What's wrong with the tree?" Agnes pulled out a leather journal, its pages yellow with age. This was my grandmother's, and her grandmother's before that. Back and back to the beginning. She opened it to a page covered in spidery handwriting. The compact was made in winter of 1751. Jeremiah, my husband, was dying. The children were starving. The Abenaki man came to our door, said he knew of our troubles, said the land itself could help, if we were willing to pay the price. He led us to the oak, ancient even then, showed us the symbols to carve, the words to speak, the offering to make Jeremiah's blood upon the roots. And in return, the land bloomed. Crops grew in winter snow. Game appeared as if called. We prospered. But the Abenaki man warned us. The tree was a door. What blessed us was trapped behind it. Hungry, patient. One of us must always stand watch. One of us must always feed it dreams, fears, nightmares, or it will take more. So much more. "Feed it?" I asked. "Our presence," Agnes explained. "Our proximity. It feeds on human consciousness. Bennett consciousness specifically. We're bound to it. When we're near, it's satisfied with our dreams. When we leave..." She gestured to the newspaper clippings I'd brought. "It finds other food. So someone has to live there, forever? Or until another way is found." She studied me. "Your grandmother thought distance would break the bond, but blood calls to blood. The tree always brings us back, one way or another. What happens if no one watches? If no Bennett feeds it? Agnes's hands trembled. 1967. The fire. That was the last time the house stood empty for more than a month. The thing beneath began to wake. Animals died first, then children started disappearing. The fire was not an accident. The town elders, they knew the old stories. They tried to burn the tree, but it survived. It fed on them instead. 3 firefighters died that night. No one could explain how. They just stopped. Hearts gave out all at once. And after. When my cousin Martha returned to rebuild, the deaths stopped. I thought of Max, of his terror. My dog knows, doesn't he? Animals are sensitive to it. They feel the hunger beneath, the wrongness of the ground. Agnes reached across the table, grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Listen to your dog, child. When the time comes, he'll show you the way. That night, Tom Garrett knocked on my door. He looked haggard, his Red Sox cap clutched in nervous hands. "I need to tell you something," he said, "about why I really stopped working on your fence." I let him in. Max stayed plastered to my side but didn't growl. Tom was safe. Human safe, anyway. "I was trimming the hedge near the oak," he began, "and I heard voices coming from underground, whispers in a language I didn't recognize. Then I saw—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Saw what?" "Faces in the bark. Dozens of them. All screaming. All trying to push through. And your grandmother. I saw your grandmother's face. Fresh. Like it had just appeared. My blood went cold. That's impossible. She died 3 months ago. I know what I saw." He stood abruptly. "I'm leaving town. Tonight, my brother lives in Florida. I'll stay with him. You should leave too, before—" "Before what?" But he was already at the door. "Before you become another face in the bark." After he left, I found myself drawn to the window. The oak stood in the moonlight, magnificent and terrible, and I could see them now, the faces Tom had mentioned, twisted in the bark's natural grooves, mouths open in silent screams. One of them did look like Grandma. The power went out at exactly midnight. Max's whine was my only warning before the scratching returned. But this time, it wasn't just sound. The walls bulged inward with each scratch, like something massive was testing the boundaries. I grabbed a flashlight, gathered Max close. We needed to leave, now. But the front door wouldn't open. Neither would the back. The windows were sealed shut, though I'd opened them for air just hours before. The house groaned, settled. No, not settled, breathed. Then I heard it, a voice, soft, familiar. Sarah, Grandma's voice, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Sarah, come to the tree, it's time," Max barked, sharp and defiant. The voice laughed, a sound like autumn leaves. "Bring the dog, we're hungry." The scratching intensified. Plaster cracked through the fissures. I glimpsed something that shouldn't exist. Darkness that moved, that reached. We ran upstairs, barricaded ourselves in the bathroom. The small window there had always stuck. Maybe. I hammered at it with the flashlight. Once, twice, it shattered. Max first, then me. We tumbled onto the porch roof, slid down, hit the ground running. Behind us, every window in the house glowed with sick, yellow light, and from within came a sound like thousands of voices whispering in unison. We made it to the car, but as I fumbled for keys, I saw them. Shadows. Human-shaped but wrong. Surrounding the oak. They swayed in a grotesque dance. Arms reaching toward us. The car wouldn't start. Of course it wouldn't. Max leaped into the driver's seat, pawed at my face, breaking my paralysis. We abandoned the car, ran for the road, but with each step, the ground seemed to stretch, the road getting further away, and always. Grandma's voice. "You can't leave. Sarah, none of us can leave. Come home." Then Agnes was there, standing at the property line. She held something, a rope, woven with strange symbols. "Take it," she shouted. "Cross the boundary." I grabbed the rope. The moment my fingers touched it, the world snapped back to normal. The road was right there. We stumbled across. The shadows stopped at the property line. Writhing in frustration. Emergency measures. Agnes panted. "Won't last long. The hunger is too great now. It's waking up." As we watched, the oak began to change. Its bark rippled like water. Faces pushed through, became three-dimensional. Hands reached out, grasping, and at its base, the ground cracked open. Something was coming through. We made it to Agnes's house, a small cottage on the other side of town. She lived alone with 17 cats, all of whom hissed when we entered. Max didn't react. He was too exhausted, too traumatized. "Tea," Agnes announced, as if we hadn't just fled from nightmare. "With brandy, lots of brandy." As she puttered in the kitchen, I noticed her walls, covered in the same symbols from the rope, carved, painted, even embroidered on samplers. "Protection," she said, returning with steaming mugs. "Though it won't matter much longer. The seal is breaking. Without a Bennett to feed it, the thing below will emerge." "What is it exactly, this thing?" Agnes settled into her chair, cats arranging themselves around her. "We don't know. The Abenaki called it the Hungry Dark, said it fell from the stars long before humans walked here. The earth swallowed it, trapped it, but it was patient. It whispered to those who would listen, promised power in exchange for freedom. And Jeremiah listened. He made a bargain. The tree became its anchor to our world, and we became its food source. But controlled, manageable, one family's nightmares instead of a town's deaths. There has to be a way to stop it." Agnes stroked a particularly large tabby. "There is. But the price." She stood, retrieved another journal. This one newer, the handwriting familiar. "Your grandmother's," Agnes said. She spent 60 years researching, found references in indigenous texts, European grimoires, even Chinese folklore. Apparently, these things, these hungry darks, they exist worldwide, always trapped, always waiting. I read Grandma's careful notes. She'd found 3 possible solutions. First, complete destruction of the anchor, but every attempt had failed. The tree was protected by the entity itself. Second, transfer the binding to a new anchor, but this required willing sacrifice. Someone would have to take the tree's place, become a living prison. Third, a guardian bond, not feeding the entity, but standing watch, keeping it contained through pure will rather than sustenance. "The third option," I said. "What does it require?" Agnes's cats all turned to stare at Max. He lifted his head, met their gaze steadily. "Not a human guardian." Agnes whispered, "Humans are too weak, too tempted by the whispers. But an animal, pure of heart, loyal beyond measure, they could hold the line." "No," I said immediately. "There has to be another way." "The guardian bond is different," Agnes continued. "Not death, not consumption. The guardian becomes part of the boundary itself. Eternal watch. The tree would sustain them, keep them from aging, but they could never leave." Max stood, walked to me, pressed his head against my chest. I could feel his heart beating, steady and sure. "He knows," Agnes said softly. He's known since you arrived. Why do you think he kept you away? He was protecting you, preparing. I won't let him." A tremendous crash interrupted me. The windows rattled in the distance. We could see a sickly glow from the direction of my property. Agnes's phone rang. She listened, face paling. The oak just expanded, grew 30 feet in minutes, and the ground, something's coming up. We drove back, stopping at the property line. What we saw defied reason. The oak was monstrous now, twisted into impossible shapes. Its roots erupted from the earth like tentacles, and between them, climbing from a chasm that hadn't existed an hour ago, was something that hurt to perceive. Darkness given form, hunger made manifest. It had too many eyes, all focused on us, too many mouths, all whispering variations of my name. The shadow figures from before were clearer now. I recognized some from the newspaper clippings. Bennett ancestors, trapped between life and death, eternal servants to the thing they'd tried to contain. "It's free," Agnes breathed. "God help us, it's free." But Max was already moving. He walked toward the property line, tail high, no trace of fear. At the boundary, he turned back to me. In his eyes, I saw everything. 7 years of love, of protection, of purpose. This was what he was meant for, not therapy, not comfort. This, "Max, please." He wagged his tail once, then crossed over, the moment his paws touched the cursed ground. Light exploded from him, golden, warm, pure. The hungry dark recoiled, its whispers turning to shrieks. Max walked steadily toward the oak. With each step, the light grew brighter. The shadows fled. The roots retreated. The thing began to sink back into its chasm. The ritual. Agnes thrust the journal at me. "You have to complete it, now." I read the words Grandma had transcribed, ancient syllables that burned my throat, but I spoke them, pouring all my love, all my gratitude, into each sound. Max reached the oak. He sat at its base, right where the chasm was closing. The golden light settled over him like armor. The hungry dark made one last attempt. Tentacles of pure void reached for my dog, but they hit the light and dissolved. It screamed, a sound that shattered windows miles away. Then it was gone, pulled back into its prison. The oak shuddered, twisted, then settled into its original form. Just a tree again. Almost. Max lay beneath it, eyes closed. I started forward, but Agnes held me back. "Wait, the bond must settle." Then Max opened his eyes. They glowed with soft, golden light. He stood, shook himself, and looked directly at me. He was changed. His fur seemed to shimmer. His presence felt larger, more solid, real in a way that made everything else seem like shadows. I crossed the boundary, knelt before him. He licked my face, tail wagging. "He's the guardian now," Agnes said, joining us. "Bound to the tree, to this place. But look, the ground." The dead circle was gone. Fresh grass sprouted, impossibly green. The tree's bark smoothed, faces fading. It looked peaceful. "How long?" I asked. "Forever, if need be. The tree will sustain him. He'll never age, never hunger. But he can never leave." Max bumped my hand with his nose. His eyes said he understood. Had always understood this was his choice. I made my choice too. I stayed. The house needed repairs, but I fixed it up. Got a job at the local library. Mrs. Price was happy to have help. The town, learning the danger had passed, welcomed me, and every day I visit Max. He's always there, guardian of the oak, his golden form visible even at night. A gentle glow that keeps the darkness at bay. He can move around the property, patrol the boundaries, but always. He returns to the tree, sometimes. Late at night, I bring my sleeping bag, lie beside him under the stars. He can't speak, but we don't need words, never did. The whispers are gone, the faces vanished. The hungry dark sleeps, trapped and guarded. And Max stands watch, tail wagging whenever I approach. Agnes passed last winter. Before she died, she told me something. The guardian bond can be transferred. When Max is ready, when another worthy soul appears, he can pass the duty on. But only when he chooses. Will he ever choose? She smiled. Would you? If you could protect the one you loved forever? Now, I understand what she meant. Some nights, I dream I'm running with Max, through fields that never end, young and free, but I always wake to find him at his post, golden eyes alert, protecting not just me but everyone. People think I'm eccentric, the woman who talks to a dog that never leaves the old oak. They don't understand that Max isn't just a dog anymore. He's a guardian, a protector, a bridge between our world and something ancient and terrible. Children love him. They're drawn to his light. He lets them pet him, play fetch within the property bounds. Their laughter heals something in both of us. Good boy, Max. I tell him every morning. The best boy. And every morning, his tail wags. His duty is hard, but his love makes it bearable. Just as my presence makes his watch less lonely. The town is safe. The darkness contained. And all because a golden retriever loved his human enough to stand eternal watch. If you're still listening, if you've made it this far, hug your dog tonight. They give us everything. Ask for so little. And sometimes, when the world needs a hero, they step forward without hesitation. Max can't leave the oak tree, but I'll never leave him. That's what love does. It stays, it watches, it protects, forever if necessary. Some call it a curse, I call it a promise. One we make every time we bring a dog into our lives. To love them, protect them, never abandon them. Max just took that promise and made it eternal. The oak tree stands quiet now, its guardian ever faithful. And if you ever find yourself in Willowbrook, Vermont, stop by the old Bennett place. You'll see him there. Golden in the sunlight, silver in the moonlight. Always watching, always protecting. Tell him he's a good boy. He likes that. He's always like that. If this story moved you, if you're holding your own dog a little tighter right now, hit that subscribe button. Share this with every dog lover you know. And tell me in the comments, what would you sacrifice to keep the world safe? What price would you pay for love? Because sometimes the real horror isn't the monster in the dark. Sometimes it's the choice between saving the world and saving the one you love most. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you don't have to choose. Sometimes love itself becomes the salvation. Sleep well. And remember, dogs know things we don't. When they warn us, we should listen. And when they protect us, we should be grateful. Forever grateful. Just like I am to Max, my guardian, my hero, my very good boy. Story number 3. The first time I noticed it, I was making coffee at 3:47 a.m. Couldn't sleep again. The old Victorian in downtown Portland had its quirks, sure, but this was different. As I walked from the kitchen to the living room, the floorboards creaked in a pattern that made me freeze mid-step. 3 short creaks. 3 long ones. 3 short again. SOS. I laughed it off then, told myself I was hearing things. But if you're listening to this right now, lying in your bed, maybe check if your floors are trying to tell you something too, because mine were, and I should have listened sooner. All right, the story begins now. I inherited the house from my great-aunt Meredith last September. She'd lived there alone for 43 years after Uncle Frank passed, never remarried, never moved. The neighbors on Hawthorne Street called her eccentric, but I just thought she was lonely. When the lawyer handed me the keys, he mentioned she'd left specific instructions. "Don't replace the floors," he'd said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. She was very particular about that. I thought it was just sentimentality. The original hardwood floors from 1923, they had character, sure. Every board told a story through its scratches and stains. But I work from home as a data analyst. Patterns are literally my job. And what I started noticing in those floors, it wasn't random. The house smelled like lavender and old books when I first moved in. October in Portland meant constant rain drumming against the windows. Perfect white noise for working. I'd set up my office in what used to be Aunt Meredith's sewing room, second floor, overlooking the backyard with its overgrown roses. That first week I cataloged every creak. Told myself it was just part of getting to know the house. The third step from the top groaned like a rusty gate. The hallway outside the bathroom clicked twice, always twice when you stepped on the loose board near the heating vent. Normal old house sounds, right? But then came that morning with the coffee, and after the SOS pattern I couldn't unhear it. Every footstep became part of a code I was desperate to crack. I started mapping the creaks, drew the floor plan on graph paper, marked each board that made a sound, used red ink for short creaks, blue for long ones. My friend Jake stopped by one evening, found me crawling across the living room floor with a tape recorder. "Emma, what the hell are you doing?" I showed him my notes. 23 pages of documented creaks, timestamps, patterns. His expression shifted from amused to concerned. "Maybe you need to get out more," he suggested gently. "When's the last time you left the house?" But I couldn't explain the feeling, like the house was trying to communicate. Every night, I'd lie in bed listening to the settling sounds, wondering if they meant something. The radiators clanking became percussion. The wind through the eaves turned into whispers. Then, on October 23rd, everything changed. I was working late, analyzing spreadsheets for a client, when I heard footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate steps crossing from one end of the attic to the other. My blood turned to ice water. I lived alone. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Then, 3 creaks, a pause. 3 more, another pause. Then a rapid series I couldn't count. I grabbed my phone, finger hovering over 911. But what would I say? "Officer, my attic is speaking in Morse code?" Instead, I grabbed the baseball bat from the hall closet, climbed the narrow stairs to the attic door. The brass doorknob was cold under my palm. I turned it slowly, pushed the door open. Empty. Just boxes of Aunt Meredith's things I hadn't sorted yet. Dust motes dancing in the moonlight streaming through the circular window. But the floor, up there, every single board was marked with chalk. Letters, numbers, symbols I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I photographed everything. The chalk was fresh. Someone had been here recently, but the windows were painted shut, hadn't been opened in decades. The only entrance was the door I'd just come through. Back in my office, I uploaded the photos, enhanced them. The markings weren't random. They formed a grid, like a giant Ouija board spread across the attic floor, and in the center, circled 3 times. Listen. That night, I barely slept. Every creak made me jump. Around 4 a.m., I gave up. Went downstairs to make tea. As the kettle heated, I heard it again. The pattern from the attic, but this time from the kitchen floor. Short, short, short. Long, long, long. Short, short, short. Then new patterns. I scrambled for my phone, opened a Morse code translator app, started tapping in what I heard. H-E-L-L-O. My hands trembled so badly I nearly dropped the phone. The kettle's whistle made me jump, splash boiling water across the counter, but I kept listening, kept translating. E-M-M-A, it knew my name. I spent the next 3 days in the Portland Public Library researching the house's history. Land records, newspaper archives, old photographs. Anything that might explain what was happening. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, helped me navigate the microfiche. The Hartley House, she said, recognizing the address. Built by Theodore Hartley in 1923, he was unusual. Made his fortune in the timber industry, but spent his later years obsessed with spiritualism. She pulled up an article from the Oregonian, dated April 15, 1931. The headline made my stomach drop. Local industrialist dies in mysterious circumstances, found in locked attic. Theodore Hartley had been discovered by his housekeeper, body arranged in a strange position on the attic floor. The police ruled it natural causes, heart failure. But the article mentioned unusual markings found throughout the house. "There's more," Mrs. Chen whispered, glancing around the empty research room. My grandmother knew the Hartley family. Said Theodore believed the house was a conductor. That's the word she used. A conductor for messages from somewhere else. I photocopied everything. Building permits showing renovations in 1967, done by my Uncle Frank. Police reports from various years mentioning disturbances at the address. And then I found it. A letter from Aunt Meredith to the Historical Society, dated just 2 months before her death. The floors must remain intact. They are not mere wood and nails, but a carefully constructed instrument. Each board was selected and placed with purpose. To disturb them would be to silence voices that have waited decades to be heard. That night, I returned home with a new determination. If the house wanted to talk, I would listen properly. I set up recording equipment in every room, professional-grade microphones, the kind used for capturing EVP and paranormal investigations. Connected them all to my computer, running software that could detect patterns in sound waves. For hours, nothing. Just the normal groans of an old house. Rain pattering against windows. The occasional car passing outside. Then, at exactly 11:47 p.m., it began. Not just creaks this time. A symphony of sounds moving through the house like a wave, starting in the basement, rising through the floors, circling each room in sequence. My software lit up like a Christmas tree, detecting patterns within patterns. I isolated the frequencies, slowed them down, ran them through the Morse code translator. Most was gibberish, but certain phrases repeated, "below the cedar." 17 steps. The truth buried. Cedar? The only cedar I knew of was the massive tree in the backyard, planted according to city records in 1924, a year after the house was built. I grabbed a flashlight, headed outside. The rain had stopped, leaving everything gleaming under the streetlights. The cedar towered above, its branches creating a canopy that blocked out the sky. 17 steps from what? I tried from the back door, landed in the middle of the yard, from the tree itself, going toward the house. That put me at the basement window, from the tree going away from the house. My flashlight beam caught something. A depression in the ground, subtle but definitely there. Like the earth had settled over something hollow below. I should have waited until morning, should have called someone. But the house was creaking urgently now, like it was excited. Like I was close to something important. The shovel was in the garden shed. The ground was soft from the rain, easy to dig, 1 foot down, 2 feet. My shovel hit something hard, metal, a box about the size of a briefcase wrapped in oilcloth. My heart pounded as I lifted it out, knocked off the dirt. Inside the oilcloth was a steel container, locked but rusted. The lock broke easily with a hammer. Documents. Dozens of them. Letters, photographs, what looked like blueprints. all wrapped in wax paper, perfectly preserved. I carried the box inside, spread everything on the dining room table. The first letter was dated 1922, addressed to Theodore Hartley from someone named Professor Marcus Ashford, Department of Acoustic Engineering, Harvard University. My dear Theodore, your theories about resonant frequencies and communication are not as far-fetched as my colleagues suggest. I have reviewed your plans for the house. If constructed precisely as specified, with each floorboard tuned to the exact frequencies we discussed, it may indeed be possible to create what you call a listening device of unprecedented sensitivity. I read through the night. Theodore hadn't just built a house, he'd built an instrument. Each floorboard was cut to specific lengths, treated with different varnishes to alter their acoustic properties, arranged in patterns based on mathematical formulas I couldn't begin to understand. But why? The answer came in a journal entry from 1929. Margaret spoke to me again last night, 3 years since the accident, but her voice comes through clearer each time. The floors are learning, adapting. Soon others will speak too. The boundary grows thin in this place. Margaret, Theodore's daughter, according to a death certificate I found, died at age 7 in 1926. Drowning accident at the Oregon coast. The house creaked around me as I read, seeming to confirm each revelation. Theodore had spent his final years trying to contact his dead daughter, turning his entire house into a massive communication device. But the letters suggested he'd succeeded in more than just hearing Margaret. Other voices had come through, hundreds of them, and not all were friendly. After discovering Theodore's documents, I couldn't see the house the same way. Every room was an acoustic chamber, every floorboard a carefully tuned key and an enormous instrument. I walked softer, listened harder. The recording equipment picked up more patterns each night, most were benign. Names spelled out in Morse code, dates, fragments of messages. I started a log. Elizabeth, 1847, waited. Find James, tell him sorry. The river took us December. Historical records confirmed some details. Elizabeth Crenshaw died 1847, consumption. James Murray, lost in the Willamette River, December 1889. The house wasn't just talking. It was remembering, or something was using it to remember. Jake stopped by again, worried since I hadn't answered texts in days. I showed him everything. The documents, the recordings, my translations. He sat quietly for a long time, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. Emma, what if it's not just receiving messages? What if it's attracting them? That night proved him right. I woke at 3 a.m. to every floorboard in the house creaking simultaneously. Not in sequence. All at once. The sound was deafening, like being inside a wooden bell. My recording equipment screeched with feedback. Then, sudden silence. A new pattern began. Aggressive, rapid-fire creaks that made the translator struggle to keep up. Get out, get out, get out, get out. Different voices, different messages, overlapping. Mine, mine, mine. She promised. Open the door, let us in. I ran downstairs, feet barely touching the steps. The front door was rattling in its frame despite no wind. The kitchen cabinets flew open, slammed shut. Every electronic device in the house turned on. TV static, radio white noise, even my laptop booting up on its own. Then I saw her. A shadow on the living room floor that didn't match any furniture. Shaped like a small child, moving across the floorboards without any source. The shadow stopped at the fireplace, and the creaking formed words. Daddy built it for me. Margaret. Had to be. I knelt beside the shadow, my voice shaking. Margaret? Is that you? The shadow shifted, seemed to turn toward me. The floors whispered. He opened too many doors. What doors? What did he do? They all want in now, hungry, angry, waiting so long. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost spread across the windows. My breath came out in clouds. The shadow child moved closer, and where it touched, the floorboards aged decades in seconds, splintering, rotting. How do I stop it? I begged. Break the instrument, silence the song, but Daddy made it strong. She was gone. The house fell quiet except for my ragged breathing, but I understood now. Theodore's machine didn't just receive messages from the dead, it attracted them. Like moths to a flame, they gathered here, pressing against whatever barrier kept them out. And that barrier was weakening. I spent the next day researching how to destroy the floors without damaging the house's structure. Contractors quoted astronomical prices, warned about lead paint, asbestos, historical preservation laws. The house creaked constantly now, agitated, voices overlapping into white noise. That evening, I found another letter I'd missed, tucked inside a book on acoustics. Theodore's final entry, dated the day before his death. I have made a terrible mistake. The instrument works too well. They gather in the spaces between sounds, growing stronger. Margaret warns me nightly. They plan to use me as a conduit. My body, positioned correctly on the attic floor, will complete a circuit I never intended. I must prevent this. Tomorrow I will destroy. The entry ended there. Theodore died the next day, found in the attic in that strange position the newspaper mentioned. I pulled up the crime scene photo I'd found in the archives, compared it to the chalk markings I'd photographed. He'd been arranged at specific points on the grid. His body had been used to complete the circuit. For 90 years the house had been active, gathering voices, growing stronger. A realization hit like ice water. Aunt Meredith knew. She'd spent 43 years as guardian, keeping the house occupied but warning against changing the floors. Because destroying them might not silence the voices, it might release them. The attacks intensified over the following nights, not just sounds anymore. Physical manifestations. Objects moving, doors slamming, temperatures fluctuating wildly. The shadow children multiplied, dozens of them racing across the floors, each one deteriorating the wood further. I tried sleeping in my car, but something always drew me back inside by dawn. The house had claimed me, just as it had claimed Aunt Meredith, Uncle Frank, Theodore himself. We were caretakers of something we didn't fully understand. On the 7th night after finding the documents, everything changed. I woke not to creaking, but to silence. Perfect, absolute silence. Even the rain had stopped. No traffic, no wind, nothing. Like the world had been muted. I checked my equipment, all recording, but picking up zero sound. Then I noticed the floors. Every single board in my bedroom was glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The light spread from room to room, following the acoustic patterns Theodore had designed. The entire house became luminescent, beautiful and terrifying. A figure materialized at the foot of my bed. Not a shadow this time. A full apparition. A man in 1920s clothing, thin, desperate-looking. Theodore Hartley himself. His mouth moved, but no sound came. Instead, the floorboards spelled out his message. The conjunction comes once a century. Tonight, they break through unless... Unless what? I whispered. Complete the counter pattern. Margaret knows, trust her. He faded. Immediately, the shadow child appeared, moving urgently. She led me to the attic, where the chalk markings now glowed like the floors below. But I noticed something new. Additional markings in the corners, barely visible. A second pattern overlaying the first. Margaret's shadow moved across the boards, and I understood. Theodore had built a doorway, but also a lock. The second pattern would seal it permanently. But it needed a living person to complete it, moving in specific sequences across the floors. The house shuddered. Cracks appeared in the walls as something massive pressed against the barrier between worlds. Voices rose in a crescendo. Thousands of them, maybe millions. All the dead who'd found this beacon over the decades, desperate to return. I began to move, following Margaret's shadow, stepping on specific boards in sequence. Each footfall produced a tone, not a creak but a pure note. The house became a massive organ, playing a composition written in architecture and time. The pressing stopped. The cracks began to seal. But the voices grew angry, desperate. No, 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 we were promised. Let us through. Something grabbed my ankle. Cold, impossibly strong. I looked down to see not shadows but hands, translucent and grasping, emerging from between the floorboards. More erupted across the room, reaching, clawing. Margaret's shadow flickered urgently. I was only halfway through the pattern. If I stopped now, the doorway would shatter completely. I yanked free, continued the sequence. Step, note, step, note. The hands multiplied, bodies beginning to emerge. An elderly woman pulled herself up through the floor, mouth open in a silent scream, a man in military uniform. Children, so many children, all pressing through as the barrier weakened. 10 more steps, 9, 8. Something grabbed both legs. I fell hard, chin hitting the floor, tasting blood. They dragged me backward, away from the final marks. Margaret's shadow flew at them, seemed to push them back momentarily. I crawled forward, fingernails digging into the wood. 5 steps. 4. The house exploded with light, every bulb burst. Plaster rained from the ceiling. A sound like the world tearing filled my ears. But I kept moving. 3, 2, 1. My foot hit the final board. The note it produced was unlike anything. Deep, resonant, seeming to come from the earth itself. The pattern completed, forming an acoustic seal that rippled outward from the attic through every floor, every wall. The hands released me. The figures faded, pulled back through the closing doorway. Their voices grew distant, muffled, then silent. The house settled with a sound like a giant sigh. I lay on the attic floor, breathing hard, watching the chalk marks fade. Margaret's shadow lingered a moment longer. The floorboards whispered one last message. Thank you. Then she too was gone. The house has been quiet for 3 weeks now. The floors still creak, but it's just wood and nails again. No patterns, no messages. I've documented everything, hidden copies in safe places. Someone needs to know the truth about this place. I'm selling the house. Found a buyer who plans to preserve it as is, turn it into a historical landmark. They don't know the real history, and I won't tell them. Some doors should stay closed. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder. The counter pattern sealed this doorway, but Theodore's journal mentioned others. Other houses, built with the same specifications, other instruments waiting to be played. If your floors start creaking in patterns, if they spell out messages in the dark, remember this story. Remember that some things are better left unheard, and whatever you do, don't complete the circuit, because I still dream about those hands reaching through the floor, still hear those voices, desperate and hungry, and sometimes I worry that I didn't seal the door. I just taught it to be quiet, but that's not where this story ends. Not really. See, 3 nights ago, I got a call, unknown number past midnight. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Static at first. Then, clear as day, floorboards creaking in a pattern. My blood ran cold. I knew that pattern. It was my name, spelled out in Morse code. But I'd moved across the country. I was in a modern apartment in Austin, Texas. No creaky floors here. Who is this? I whispered. The creaking stopped. A voice came through, young, female, terrified. You're Emma, right? You wrote about the Portland house online. Please help me. My floors started talking last week. My heart sank. Where are you? Burlington, Vermont. I bought this old Victorian 6 months ago. The realtor said it had character. But now, her voice broke. They know my daughter's name. They keep spelling it out. She's only 4, and she says she sees shadow friends who want to play. I closed my eyes. Theodore's journal had mentioned others. Other houses built to the same specifications. How many were out there? How many instruments waiting to be played? Listen carefully, I said. Whatever you do, don't let her play with them. And start documenting everything, every creak, every pattern. The previous owner left notebooks, she interrupted. Dozens of them. All filled with dots and dashes. I thought he was crazy, but send me photos of those notebooks, tonight, and I hesitated, then gave her the advice I wished someone had given me. Start learning the counter pattern now, before it's too late. We talked for an hour. Her name was Sarah. Her daughter, Lily. The house was built in 1924, 1 year after mine. The builder, a man named Harrison Blackwood, who'd corresponded frequently with Theodore Hartley. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, staring at the ceiling. I thought I was free. Thought selling the house meant leaving it all behind, but some things follow you. My laptop chimed. Sarah's email, photos of notebook pages, architectural plans, letters, and one photo that made me gasp. A group picture from 1923. The Society for Acoustic Transcendence written on the back. 12 men standing before a half-built house. Theodore Hartley on the left, Harrison Blackwood on the right, and 10 others, each presumably building their own acoustic doorway. 12 houses, scattered across the country, all tuned to the same frequencies, all potential breaches between worlds. I've started a map, found 3 more so far through old newspaper articles about mysterious circumstances and unusual acoustic properties. 1 in Savannah, Georgia, 1 in Salem, Massachusetts, 1 in San Francisco that burned in 1906 but was rebuilt to the exact same specifications. Last night, I dreamed of Margaret again. She stood in a vast space filled with doors, each one creaking, whispering, calling. She pointed to them one by one, shaking her head. Behind each door, shadows pressed and writhed, desperate to break through. How many? I asked her. She held up all 10 fingers, then closed them into fists. 10 more houses, 10 more instruments. And if even one fails, if one doorway opens completely, I woke to find a message traced in the dust on my nightstand. I live alone. My windows were locked. But there it was, in a child's shaky handwriting. They're learning to travel between the houses now. The song connects them all. Find the others before... The message ended in a smear, like someone had been pulled away mid-sentence. So, if you're listening to this, if your floors have started to creak in patterns, you're not alone and you're not crazy. But you need to act fast, document everything, learn the counter pattern. And whatever you do, don't let them know you can hear them at first. They get excited when they realize someone's listening. They get eager. I'm building a network now. Sarah in Vermont, Marcus in Savannah, who just reached out. Others who found my story recognize the signs. We share information, patterns, protection methods. Because this isn't over. It's just beginning. And sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I hear them. Not through floors anymore, but through the spaces between sounds. In the pause between heartbeats, in the silence between words. They're still there, still waiting, still watching for their chance. The doorways may be sealed, but doors can always be reopened. And somewhere, out there, in one of those 12 houses, someone who doesn't know the dangers walking across their creaking floors, hearing patterns in the sound, reaching for their phone to record the strange messages, just like I did. Sweet dreams, everyone. And remember, if your house starts talking to you, you can reach out. You're not alone in this. We're here. We're listening. and we know how to fight back. But first, you have to survive that first night when you realize the creaking isn't random. When you understand that something is trying desperately to tell you something, or to come through. Stay safe. Stay vigilant. And whatever you do, never complete the original pattern. Only the counter pattern can save you. I've hidden instructions in the comments of my original post, coded in a way only those who truly need them will understand. The floorboards in my new apartment are silent, but I know that's just an illusion. They're all connected now, all 12 houses singing their terrible song across the miles, through the years, between the worlds. And somewhere tonight, someone's floors are creaking for the first time, spelling out their name. Story number 4. The first time I noticed it, I blamed the cat, even though I don't have a cat anymore. Let me explain. My name is Sarah, and I live alone in a third-floor apartment in Portland, Oregon. I work from home as a freelance editor, which means I'm surrounded by books all day, every day. Fiction, nonfiction, manuscripts, you name it. My living room looks like a Barnes & Noble exploded, and that's exactly how I like it. But 3 weeks ago, something started happening that made me question everything I thought I knew about living alone. It started with my copy of Stephen King's The Shining. I'd left it on my coffee table before bed, bookmark tucked neatly at page 237. The next morning, it was open, face down, page 342. Now, I know what you're thinking. You probably knocked it over in your sleep, Sarah. You sleepwalk, Sarah. You're just forgetful, Sarah. Trust me. I thought all those things too. But here's the thing about page 342 in that particular edition. It's the page where Jack Torrance first enters room 217, and that detail matters. Because every single book I've found open since then, they're all turned to pages about doors, or rooms, or entering places you shouldn't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this really started. Let me tell you why I haven't slept properly in 3 weeks. And let me tell you why I'm seriously considering moving, even though I just signed a 2-year lease. Tuesday morning, 6:47 a.m. My alarm hadn't even gone off yet when I shuffled into the living room for my glasses. That's when I saw it. The Shining, splayed open on the coffee table like a dead bird. My bookmark lay 3 feet away on the floor. I picked up the book, trying to remember if I'd gotten up in the night. Maybe I'd had a nightmare and come out here to... What? Read about haunted hotels? The page was creased now, a permanent fold right down the middle of Jack's descent into room 217. Okay, I muttered, smoothing the page. Weird. I made coffee, answered some emails, and forgot about it. Until Thursday. This time it was my work manuscript. A cozy mystery about a librarian who solves crimes. I'd been editing chapter 12 the night before, about halfway through the book. Thursday morning, open to chapter 18, the chapter where the protagonist discovers a hidden room behind the library's reference section. My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. No bookmark this time. I'd been working digitally, but I always kept the physical manuscript for reference. It had been closed. I was sure of it, absolutely certain. I checked my laptop. Last edited, 11:43 p.m. I'd gone to bed at midnight. So, between midnight and 6 a.m., someone, or something, had opened my manuscript and found the one chapter about hidden spaces. That's when I started paying attention. Friday. My copy of House of Leaves opened to the chapter about the hallway that shouldn't exist. Saturday. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The exact page where Lucy first pushes through the coats. Sunday. A cookbook. A goddamn cookbook. Open to a recipe for secret garden salad, with a little note in the margin about hidden ingredients behind the pantry door. By Monday, I'd installed a camera. One of those little Wi-Fi things from Best Buy that sends alerts to your phone. I pointed it right at my bookshelf, made sure everything was closed and in place, and went to bed. 2:17 a.m. Motion detected. I grabbed my phone so fast I knocked over my water glass. The live feed showed nothing, just my books, all closed, all normal. I scrolled back through the recording. 2:16 a.m., books closed. 2:17 a.m., books closed. 2:18 a.m. Wuthering Heights was open. I didn't see it happen. One frame closed, the next frame open. Like a glitch, like something had edited out the actual moment. My heart hammered as I zoomed in. Chapter 4. Lockwood's nightmare about the ghost at the window, trying to get in. I didn't go back to sleep. "You need to get out more," my sister Emma said over FaceTime. She lived in Denver, safe and far from whatever was happening in my apartment. "When's the last time you left the house?" "Tuesday," I lied. It had been longer. "Em, I'm serious. Look." I carried my laptop to the living room, showing her the scene. 7 books lay open across various surfaces. All turned to specific pages. All about thresholds, doorways, or hidden rooms. Okay, that's admittedly creepy, but there has to be an explanation. Maybe you have mice, or, I don't know, a draft. A draft that only affects books about doors? She sighed. "What does your landlord say?" "Mr. Petrosky thinks I'm crazy. He came by yesterday, checked the windows, the heating vents, even looked for signs of pests. Nothing. And the camera?" I'd shown her the footage. 6 more incidents, all the same. One frame closed, next frame open. No movement, no blur, just change. "Maybe the camera's broken," she suggested. I thought that too. So I bought another one. Different brand. Same thing happens. Emma bit her lip. A habit from childhood when she was thinking hard. "Okay, what about the previous tenant? Did anything weird happen to them?" I hadn't thought of that. After we hung up, I did some digging. The apartment had been empty for 3 months before I moved in. The tenant before me, a woman named Claire Chen, had broken her lease early. No reason given. I found her on LinkedIn. Marketing manager at a tech startup. Normal looking. Smiling profile photo. I sent a message, trying not to sound insane. "Hi Claire, I'm the current tenant in your old apartment on Morrison Street. Quick question. Did you ever notice anything unusual about the place? Just trying to figure out some quirks. Thanks." She read it within minutes. The typing indicator appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, which unit? 3B. The typing indicator appeared for a full minute. Then, "Can we talk on the phone?" My mouth went dry. I sent my number. She called immediately. No pleasantries, just, "Are the books moving?" What? "The books. Are they opening by themselves? To specific pages?" I nearly dropped the phone. "Yes. How did you—" "Listen carefully. I don't have much time. I'm at work. Don't read the pages. Whatever you do, don't read them in order." "In order? What do you mean?" "The pages. If you put them in the order they were opened, they tell you something. But once you read it, once you understand what it's trying to show you—" She paused. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. "I found something in that apartment, behind the bookshelf. And ever since then, it's been trying to show others." "Found what, Claire? What did you find?" "I have to go. Just don't read them in order. And whatever you do, don't look behind the bookshelf in the living room. The built-in one. Promise me." "Claire." She hung up. I stood there, staring at my phone. Then, slowly, I turned to look at the built-in bookshelf. The one that came with the apartment. The one I'd filled with my collection without a second thought. It looked so normal. So innocent. But now, I couldn't stop staring at it. I lasted exactly 6 hours. 6 hours of trying to work, trying to eat lunch, trying to pretend Claire Chen hadn't just confirmed my worst fears. 6 hours of not looking at the bookshelf, of not thinking about what might be behind it. At 4 p.m., I caved. The built-in bookshelf was one of those floor-to-ceiling units, painted the same off-white as the walls. I started pulling books off, stacking them on the floor. Fiction, non-fiction, my collection of vintage psychology textbooks. Soon, half my library sat in precarious towers around the living room. That's when I saw it. A seam in the back panel. Barely visible, painted over multiple times, but definitely there. A rectangle about the size of a hardcover book. My hands trembled as I pressed on it. Nothing. I tried sliding it. Nothing. Then, on instinct, I pushed and twisted, like opening a child-proof medicine bottle. Click. A small section of the panel swung inward, revealing a dark space behind. The smell hit me first. Old paper and something else. Something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and peered inside. A leather journal sat in the hollow space, covered in dust. But that wasn't what made me jerk back. It was the walls of the compartment. They were covered in writing. Tiny, cramped words spiraling in patterns that hurt to look at. The same phrase, over and over. She wants to come through. She wants to come through. She wants to come through. I reached for the journal with shaking fingers. The leather felt strange, too warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight. Inside, the first page had a name, Margaret Winters, and a date, 1987. I flipped through quickly. Diary entries, seemingly normal at first. Margaret had been a librarian, lived alone, loved to read. Then the entries got stranger. October 3rd found the most peculiar thing in a donated book today. A pressed flower, but not like any I've seen. When I touched it, I could have sworn I heard whispering. October 15th. The flower is gone, but something else is here. The books are trying to tell me something. They fall open when I'm not looking, always to pages about doors. October 27th. I understand now. She's been trying to find a way through for so long. Trapped between pages, between words. She just needs someone to read the story in the right order. November 1st. I've started collecting the pages, writing down each passage the books show me. It's beautiful, really. A story hidden across 100 different books. A story about coming home. The entries stopped there. But tucked into the back of the journal were loose pages, photocopies from different books. I recognized some of them immediately. Page 342 from The Shining. The wardrobe scene from Narnia. Others I didn't know, but they all had one thing in common. They were all about crossing thresholds. At the bottom of the stack was a note in different handwriting. Margaret Winters disappeared November 3rd, 1987. This journal was found in her apartment, along with 47 books, all open to specific pages. When the pages were read in chronological order of discovery, they formed a coherent narrative about a woman trapped in a liminal space, desperate to return. The books have been donated to various used bookstores throughout Portland. The journal should remain hidden. Do not let her complete the story. Building Management, 1987. I sat back on my heels, the journal heavy in my hands. 37 years. This had been happening for 37 years. How many tenants? How many people had found books mysteriously open, pages marked, messages hidden in plain sight? And then I realized something that made my blood run cold. I'd been keeping a list. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been documenting every book, every page in a spreadsheet on my laptop. I'd wanted to find a pattern, and I had the order, the exact chronological order of discovery. My laptop sat on the coffee table, closed but not shut down. The spreadsheet would be right there, one click away. All the pages, all the passages, the hidden story waiting to be read in full. I looked at the books scattered around me. At least a dozen lay open now, their pages fluttering slightly in the breeze from the heating vent. Were there more I hadn't found yet? Books in my bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen. How many pieces of the story had already been revealed? And what would happen if I read them all? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every creak of the building, every whisper of wind, every distant car horn made me jump. I sat on my couch, laptop closed, surrounded by open books like some kind of literary crime scene. 3 a.m. My phone buzzed. Claire. "Did you look?" I typed back, "Yes, and?" Found Margaret's journal, found the note. A long pause. Then, "How many pages do you have?" I looked at my spreadsheet icon still unopened. I haven't counted, haven't read them in order. "Good, don't, I made that mistake." "What happened?" Another long pause. So long I thought she'd stopped responding. Then, I saw her, just for a second. In the space between one word and the next. God, Sarah, she's been trying to get through for so long. She's desperate, hungry. I think she feeds on stories and she's been starving. Who is she? I don't know. Margaret's journal never says. But I think she might have been a writer or a reader, someone who loved books so much, she found a way to live inside them. But now she's trapped. I stared at the open books around me. House of Leaves had fallen open to a new page. Something about doors that open onto nothing. My cookbook had flipped to a recipe I'd never seen before. Threshold bread. Even my work manuscript had changed chapters. Claire, how do we stop it? I moved, changed cities. Got rid of every book I owned, started over with a Kindle. Can't open physical pages if you don't have any. That's it? Just leave? Unless you want to read the story, unless you want to see what happens when she finally finds someone who puts all the pieces together. I looked around my apartment, my books, my life, everything I'd built here in Portland. What if she just wants to be heard? What if reading the story sets her free? Sarah, no, you don't understand. I saw her. She's not some sad ghost looking for peace. She's starving. And once you open that door, once you give her a path through... The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times. Just leave, trust me. Pack what you can and leave tonight. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because there was something Claire didn't know. Something I hadn't told anyone. 3 years ago, my grandmother died. She'd been a writer, never published, but always writing. Stories, poems, letters. She used to say that words were doors, and every book was a house you could live in. The night she died, I was reading to her. The Secret Garden, her favorite. I'd just gotten to the part where Mary finds the door hidden behind the ivy when Grandma squeezed my hand. Sometimes, she whispered, we find our own doors. Those were her last words. And now, sitting in my apartment, surrounded by mysterious messages hidden in books, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was connected. That maybe the woman trying to come through wasn't a stranger at all. I opened my laptop. The spreadsheet loaded instantly. 23 books so far, 23 pages. I'd been meticulous, copying down the exact passages, noting the time of discovery. All I had to do was sort them chronologically and read. My finger hovered over the mouse. Sarah, are you there? I looked at Claire's message, then at the journal in my lap. Margaret Winters had read the story. She'd disappeared. But what if she hadn't been taken? What if she'd chosen to go? I started to type a response to Claire when something caught my eye. A book on my shelf. One that had been closed just moments ago was now open. But this wasn't like the others. This was my grandmother's journal, the one I'd kept sealed in plastic since her death, unable to bring myself to read her final entries. It lay open to a page dated 3 years ago, the day before she died. My hands shook as I stood, walked over, looked down at her handwriting. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then you found the doors. I'm sorry, I should have warned you. But some stories need to be told, even if they take a lifetime to unfold, even if they scatter themselves across 1,000 different pages. She's been waiting so patiently. We trapped her there, you see, your great-grandmother and I. We were young, foolish, jealous of her talent. She could make words dance, make stories breathe. So we found a way to lock her between the lines. But every prison needs a key, and every story needs an ending. The choice is yours now. Read the pages in order and set her free, or leave and let someone else carry this burden. But know this, she's not evil. She's just lost, and very, very lonely. All my love, Grandma Rose. P.S. Her name is Lily Winters, Margaret's sister. She just wants to come home. I sank to my knees, the journal clutched to my chest. Family. This was about family, about jealousy and mistakes and things that couldn't be undone. My phone buzzed. Claire again. Sarah, please. Whatever you're thinking, don't do it. But I was already opening the spreadsheet, already sorting the entries, already reading the first passage. Page 237, The Shining. Sometimes human places create inhuman monsters. Page 318, House of Leaves. This is not for you. Page 43, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Once there were 4 children. As I read each passage in order, a story emerged. Not a horror story, but something sadder. A woman who loved words so much she tried to become one with them, who found a way to step inside stories, to live between pages. But her sister and mother, fearing she'd be lost forever, performed some kind of ritual, trapped her there, turned her into nothing more than whispers in margins, spaces between paragraphs. The final passage was from my grandmother's journal. To open the door, speak her name 3 times while holding the last page. But be sure, be very sure, that you're ready for what comes next. I looked around my apartment, at my books, my life, my carefully constructed world of words. Then I thought about Lily Winters, trapped for decades in the spaces between stories, alone, forgotten, erased. I held the journal page and spoke clearly. Lily Winters. The air shifted. Lily Winters. The pages of every open book began to flutter. Lily Winters. Silence, then a whisper, so soft I almost missed it. Thank you. The room filled with the scent of old paper and pressed flowers. For just a moment I saw her, a shimmer in the air like words made visible. A woman made of sentences, paragraphs for hair, punctuation for eyes. She smiled. A story finally given its ending, and then she was gone. The books around me fell closed one by one. The air cleared, and for the first time in weeks, my apartment felt empty. Peacefully, blissfully empty. I picked up my phone, typed a message to Claire. It's over. She's free. What did you do? I finished the story. I've slept soundly every night since. My books stay closed unless I open them. The built-in bookshelf is just a bookshelf. But sometimes when I'm reading late at night, I swear I can feel her. Lily, reading along with me. Not trapped anymore, but choosing to visit. To share in the stories she loved so much. Last week I found a pressed flower in my copy of The Secret Garden. One that wasn't there before. It smells like spring and new beginnings. I kept it, bookmarked at the page where Mary finally opens the hidden door. Some stories, after all, deserve happy endings. Or do they? Because this morning, I found something else. A new journal, leather-bound and warm to the touch, sitting on my coffee table. Inside, the first page has my name, my handwriting. But I didn't write it. The entry is dated tomorrow. It says, "She wasn't the only one we trapped. Sweet dreams, if you can manage them. And hey, let me know in the comments if your books have been acting strange lately. I'm starting to think Lily had friends." Now, if you've made it this far, congratulations. You're not just a viewer, you're part of something bigger. Something that watches with you. that sits beside you as you watch, as you listen, as you wait. Because this story doesn't end when the screen fades to black. It follows you